She fired him in front of the whole floor. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what he knew. He packed his toolbox without a word, kissed his daughter's drawing taped inside the lid, and walked out. What she didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that the engine she'd spent 6 months trying to fix bore his name on the original patent, and in 3 weeks, she was going to need him to save her company. The town of Millhaven, Ohio didn't have much to recommend it. A grain elevator at the edge of the highway, a diner that closed at 2, a post office that doubled as a notary, and on the corner of Route 9 and Caldwell Street, a single-bay garage with a hand-painted sign that read, Cole Automotive, all makes, all models. That was Ray Cole's world now. It hadn't always been. 12 years earlier, Ray had been a lead propulsion engineer at Harmon Dynamics, one of the most respected names in performance engine development in the country. He hadn't stumbled into the work. He'd been recruited out of Ohio State at 22 by a man named Gerald Harmon himself, who'd seen Ray's senior thesis on variable compression ratios and called his dormitory phone. Ray had spent 9 years inside that company's R&D division, working on engines that would eventually be adopted by 3 major automotive manufacturers. His name was on 4 patents. His hands had built prototypes that now lived in museums. Then Diane got sick. He didn't talk about it. Not to customers, not to his daughter, not to the few people in Millhaven who'd known him long enough to ask. What people knew was this. Ray Cole had a little girl named Lily. He opened the garage at 7 every morning, and he could fix anything you put in front of him. That was enough. Lily was 6. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's habit of going very still when she was thinking hard about something. She carried everywhere a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit, gray, one ear slightly longer than the other from years of being held. Every morning before school, without fail, she lined up her shoes at the door in size order, even though she only owned 2 pairs. Ray had watched her do it 100 times and never once interrupted it. Some things a child builds for herself. You don't touch those. Their apartment was above the garage. 3 rooms, low ceilings, a radiator that knocked in the winter. The kitchen table had a wobble Ray had been meaning to fix for 8 months and hadn't. Lily had decided the wobble gave the table character and had named it Gerald. Ray had stopped planning to fix it after that. Mornings were theirs. He made eggs. She arranged her shoes. He drove her 4 blocks to school in the truck, and she always rolled the window down regardless of the temperature. He'd stopped telling her it was cold. She'd told him once, very seriously, that she needed to feel the morning, and he hadn't had an argument for that. He got back to the garage by 8. Most days it was oil changes, brake jobs, the occasional transmission. He was faster than any shop in the county and charged less than half what the dealership quoted. He didn't advertise this. People found out the way people find things out in small towns, by being told by someone who'd been surprised. What Ray did advertise quietly was that he didn't turn work away. If it ran on an engine, he'd look at it. It was this policy that had brought the call 4 months ago from a woman named Patricia Voss, operations manager at the regional headquarters of Harmon Dynamics' successor company, now called Harmon Meridian. The company had been acquired 7 years earlier by a woman named Claire Sutton, who'd built a private equity portfolio, buying distressed industrial brands and repositioning them as premium manufacturers. She was 41. She appeared on the covers of business magazines. She was described consistently as decisive. Patricia Voss had found Ray's number through a supplier contact. The issue, she explained, was a prototype engine, a redesign of one of Harmon's legacy high-performance units, now being retooled for a government fleet contract worth $60 million. The internal engineering team had been working on it for 6 months. It wouldn't run right. The prototype, through fault codes no one could interpret, vibrated at mid-range RPM in a way that suggested something structural, and had already caused 1 test vehicle to seize on the dyno. 3 outside consultants had looked at it. 2 had billed for their time and said nothing useful. One had suggested scrapping the design entirely. Patricia Voss had not told Claire Sutton she was making this call. Ray had driven to the facility in his truck, wearing his usual jacket, gray canvas, collar, frayed at the left side where Lily had once chewed on it as a toddler, and he'd never replaced it. He'd parked next to a row of company vehicles that cost more individually than his garage had earned in the last 2 years. He'd walked in through the side entrance and been escorted without much ceremony to the engineering bay. He'd looked at the engine for 45 minutes without touching it. Then he'd asked for a torque spec sheet, a flashlight, and a cup of coffee. Patricia had watched him work for 3 hours that first afternoon. She hadn't introduced him to anyone. She'd wanted to see what he would find before she told anyone he was there. What he found, by the end of that afternoon, was enough to fill 2 pages of notes in his own shorthand, a notation system he'd developed himself in his 20s that looked, to anyone else, like a foreign language. He came back the following Monday, and the Monday after that. Nobody in the building knew his name except Patricia. He was, to everyone else who passed through that bay, just the mechanic, the one in the gray jacket, the one who kept coming back. He didn't correct them. At home, in the evenings, Lily drew pictures at the kitchen table while Ray read. The symbolic object, a single folded page, worn soft at the creases, the original hand-drawn schematic of the engine Ray had designed in his final year at Harmon Dynamics, lived in a manila envelope tucked behind the cookbooks on the kitchen shelf. He never took it out, but he knew it was there. Some things you keep not because you need them, because they remind you of what you know. The morning it happened, Ray had arrived at 6:50. He'd dropped out Lily at her aunt's. School was closed for a teacher development day, and driven the 40 minutes to the Harmon Meridian facility with his toolbox in the bed of the truck and a thermos of coffee wedged between the seats. The prototype had been giving him a specific problem all week, a harmonic resonance at 3,400 RPM that he'd finally traced to a tolerancing issue in the secondary balance shaft housing. He knew what it was now. He knew exactly what it was. He needed 2 hours, maybe 3, and the engine would run. He signed in at the side entrance the way he always did, nodded to the security guard whose name was Dennis, walked the corridor to the engineering bay. What he didn't know was that Claire Sutton had arrived at 6:15. She had flown in from Chicago the night before for a quarterly review, and her first item on the agenda was the prototype. 6 months behind internal schedule. 3 consultants billed and gone. A government contract with a delivery clause that had already been pushed once. She had walked into the facility that morning, the way she walked into all of them, heels on concrete, team trailing, expression calibrated, to communicate that whatever had been happening here was about to change. She reached the engineering bay at 7:10. Ray was already at the bench. His jacket was on the stool behind him. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. He was holding a precision caliper against the balance shaft housing, his face 6 inches from the component, not moving. Claire Sutton stopped in the doorway. Behind her stood her operations director, 2 junior engineers from the Chicago office, and a man named Todd Briggs, head of the facility's internal engineering team, who had spent 6 months on this engine and was aware, in a way that made his jaw tight, that he had not been the one to find the problem. Claire looked at Ray. Then she looked at Todd. "Who is this?" she said. Todd said, He's a consultant. Patricia brought him in." Patricia." Claire's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Patricia brought in a mechanic." Ray did not look up. "He's been coming in on Mondays," Todd said. "He's been making some progress on the resonance issue." Some progress. Claire walked further into the bay. She stopped 4 feet from the bench where Ray was working and looked at him the way you look at something that shouldn't be where it is. Her eyes went to the frayed collar of his jacket on the stool, to the thermos, to the handwritten notes in his shorthand pinned to the corkboard above the bench. "What are those?" she said. Ray set the caliper down carefully. He looked at his notes. "Dynict," he said. They looked like they were written by someone who learned to write in a cave. Two of the junior engineers laughed. One stopped himself. Ray looked at her for a moment. His face was still. Then he looked back at the engine. "Who authorized this?" Claire said to the room. "Who authorized bringing in an outside?" She looked at Ray again, at his clothes, at the truck visible through the bay window. Contractor with no credentials on file, no NDA on record, no engineering certification visible anywhere to work on a $60 million prototype. Patricia Voss had appeared in the doorway. Her face had gone the color of old paper. "I did," Patricia said. "He's been, Claire. He's found things the other consultants missed. If you look at what he's identified on the balance shaft, Patricia," Claire said at once. That was all. She turned back to Ray. He had not moved. He was still standing at the bench, both hands resting on the edge, looking at the engine. "I don't know who you are," Claire said. "I don't know who let you in here or what you think you've been doing. But you're not credentialed, you're not contracted, and you are not supposed to be in this room." She paused. "Gather your things." Ray reached for his thermos. "I want his notes pulled from that board," Claire said to Todd. "I want the access log reviewed. And I want to know every morning he's been in this facility." Ray folded his notes carefully. He put them in the inside pocket of his jacket. He picked up his toolbox by the handle. He did not look at Patricia. He did not look at Claire Sutton. He looked briefly at the engine. It was the look a man gives something he built, or something close enough to what he built that the difference is only time and other people's decisions. A quiet look, not angry, not sad, just a look that knew. Then he walked out. The bay was silent for a moment after the door closed. One of the junior engineers looked at the corkboard where Ray's notes had been. Todd Briggs looked at the engine. Patricia Voss stood in the doorway, with her hands clasped in front of her, and said nothing. Claire Sutton straightened her cuffs and said, "Now, show me where we actually are." Outside in the parking lot, Ray set his toolbox in the bed of the truck. He stood for a moment in the cold air, hands in his jacket pockets. Then he drove the 40 minutes back to Millhaven. He picked up Lily from his sister's house. She was carrying Biscuit by one ear and had marker on her left hand in 3 colors. "Did you fix it?" she asked, the way she always asked. "Not today," he said. She accepted this the way she accepted most things, completely, without conditions, and climbed into the truck. He drove her home. He made lunch. He did not tell her what had happened. She lined up her shoes at the door, even though she hadn't been to school, because that was the order of things, and the order of things mattered. Ray watched her do it and said nothing. The call came on a Thursday, 18 days after Ray had walked out of the facility. It came from Patricia Voss at 7 in the morning, while Ray was making eggs. He let it go to voicemail. She called again. He listened to the message while Lily ate breakfast and arranged her crayons along the edge of the table in color order, a new variation of the morning routine. Red to violet, precise as a spectrum. The message was 4 sentences. The prototype had seized again on the dyno. The government contract deadline had been moved up, not pushed back. Claire Sutton's internal team had spent 18 days on the balance shaft issue and hadn't resolved it. And Claire Sutton herself was asking. Patricia chose the word carefully, slowly, as if she understood what it cost, if Ray would come back. Ray stood at the counter for a long moment. "Who was that?" Lily asked. "Work," he said. "The engine work?" "Yes." She considered this. "Are you going to go fix it?" He looked at her. She had a crayon in each hand, orange in the left, yellow in the right, and was holding them with the focused looseness of a child who is paying attention to 2 things at once. "Probably," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her spectrum. Horngrawliger. He drove out the following morning. Patricia met him at the side entrance. She looked like she hadn't slept cleanly in 2 weeks. She didn't apologize. There wasn't language for what had happened that would have fit in a parking lot, but she held the door open and said, quietly, "Thank you for coming." Ray nodded and walked in. The engineering bay had changed in 18 days. There were more people in it. A whiteboard had been added along the far wall covered in diagrams, most of them wrong in ways Ray could identify from across the room. The prototype sat on the bench exactly where he'd left it, with one critical difference. Someone had disassembled the secondary balance shaft housing and reassembled it incorrectly, reversing the orientation of the thrust bearing by 180 degrees. It would never have run right. It would have thrown the same fault code until someone noticed. No one had noticed. Ray set his toolbox on the bench. He didn't say anything about the thrust bearing yet. He put on his glasses, wire-framed, bent slightly at the left temple from the time Lily had sat on them, and picked up the inspection light. He moved it slowly across the housing, not rushing, the beam traveling in the methodical, overlapping passes he'd learned from Gerald Harmon himself in a basement lab in Columbus 20 years ago. Gerald had told him once that an engine would always tell you what was wrong. You just had to be willing to listen longer than you thought necessary. Ray listened. There were 4 people in the bay. Patricia, Todd Briggs, a junior engineer named Quan, who had been assigned to the prototype full-time, and a woman Ray didn't recognize who was standing near the whiteboard with a tablet and saying nothing. He became aware, without looking up, that they had all stopped talking. He reached into his toolbox and withdrew a dial indicator gauge, his own, not the facility's, calibrated to 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch. He mounted it to the bench vise and brought the probe tip into contact with the balance shaft journal. He rotated the shaft by hand, slowly, watching the needle. He rotated it again. Then he was still for a moment. "Your thrust bearing is reversed," he said. Not to anyone in particular, to the room. Todd Briggs said, "We had to disassemble for inspection." "It's reversed," Ray said again, without looking up. 180 out. It's been running axial load against the housing face instead of the bearing seat. That's your metal contamination in the oil sample. That's why it's seized." He paused. "The resonance issue is separate. That's still in the housing tolerances. But you can't address the resonance until the bearing is correctly oriented, or you're diagnosing on top of a second problem." The room was quiet. Quan, the junior engineer, had lowered his clipboard slowly to his side. He was looking at the dial indicator, then at Ray's hands, then back at the indicator, with the expression of someone watching a card trick and trying to find the moment the deception happened. Except there was no deception, and he was beginning to understand that. Ray corrected the bearing orientation. It took 11 minutes. He narrated none of it. His hands moved with the specific economy of someone who had done this not hundreds of times, but at a level deeper than repetition, at the level where the movement and the understanding are the same thing, where the hands know because the mind made them know a long time ago. Then he returned to the housing tolerances. He worked for 2 hours. The room stayed quiet around him in the particular way that rooms go quiet when everyone present has silently agreed to stop pretending they understand what they are watching. It was the woman with the tablet who broke it. She had been standing at the whiteboard the entire time. She was perhaps 35, with the careful stillness of someone trained to observe before speaking. At some point in the second hour, she had stopped looking at her tablet and started looking at Ray, at his hands, at the notation in his shorthand on the page he'd unfolded from his jacket pocket, at the way he moved. She crossed the bay and stood near Patricia. "Who is he?" she said quietly. Patricia said, "He's a mechanic from Millhaven." The woman looked at Patricia. Then she looked back at Ray. "What's his name?" "Ray Cole." Something shifted in the woman's expression. She looked at her tablet. She typed something. She waited. Then she looked up at Ray with an expression that was not quite recognition. It was more precise than that. It was the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they already half knew. She walked to the whiteboard. On the corner of it, away from the diagrams, she wrote 2 words and a number and turned back to face the room. R. Cole. Patent 7,004,203. He designed the original engine, she said, the one this prototype is based on. He's the primary inventor on the foundational patent. Nobody spoke. Todd Briggs looked at the whiteboard, then at the engine, then at Ray. Ray had not looked up. He was measuring the housing bore with a snap gauge, his face 6 inches from the component, moving with the same unhurried precision he had moved with for 2 hours. From the doorway, Patricia had called her in, quietly, 10 minutes earlier, not knowing what was about to happen but sensing that something was. Claire Sutton stood and watched. Her face was unreadable, but she had stopped moving, and her hand, which had been holding her phone, had lowered it to her side without looking at it. Quan looked at Ray, then said, "Not to anyone, just into the room." Half to himself, he already knew what was wrong. He knew the first time he came in. Nobody disagreed with him. Later, Ray would drive home and pick up Lily from school. She would climb into the truck and ask, the way she always asked, "Did you fix it?" He would say, "Most of it." She would think about this for a moment, watching the road through the windshield, and then say, "The rest will wait for you." He wouldn't respond, but his hands on the wheel would settle, just slightly, just enough, in the way that hands settle when something true has been said out loud. She came on a Saturday. Ray was in the garage when the car pulled up, a black sedan, not a company vehicle, no plates he recognized. He was under a '09 Silverado doing a brake line replacement, Lily upstairs watching a nature program about tide pools. The garage door opened to the cold November air because he liked the cold when he worked. It helped him think. He heard the heels before he saw her. He slid out from under the truck and stood. Claire Sutton was standing at the entrance to the garage in a wool coat, alone. No operations director, no team. She looked at the bay, the single lift, the pegboard tools, the coffee can of hardware on the bench, with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not contempt this time. Something more uncomfortable than contempt. She looked at him. "Mr. Cole." He wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Mrs. Sutton." She stepped inside. Her heels found the uneven concrete, and she adjusted her weight without acknowledging it. She looked at the truck on the lift, then at the bench, then back at him. "I'd like to make you an offer," she said. Ray said nothing. She reached into her coat and produced a folded document. She set it on the bench without handing it to him. "Full consulting contract. Retroactive to your first day in the facility. Market rate for a senior propulsion engineer, not a shop mechanic." She paused. "And a number on top of that, a resolution fee for the time and the circumstances, that I think you'll find is serious." Ray looked at the document on the bench. He didn't pick it up. "There's a condition," Claire said. He waited. "The patent question." She said it carefully. "The way you say something you've rehearsed being careful about. Our legal team believes the foundational patent has complications. Assignment clauses from your original employment contract with Harmon Dynamics. We think there's a reasonable argument that the IP transferred with the acquisition." She held his gaze. "We'd need you to sign a waiver, acknowledge that the design work belongs to Harmon Meridian. In exchange for the contract and the resolution fee, you'd walk away with a significant sum, and your name wouldn't need to be part of any further proceedings." Ray looked at her for a long moment. He heard the stairs creak. Lily appeared in the doorway that connected the garage to the interior stairwell. Barefoot, biscuit under one arm, her hair flattened on one side from the couch. She looked at Claire Sutton with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of a 6-year-old encountering something new. Claire looked at her. Something moved behind Claire's eyes. A calculation, a consideration, something Ray clocked and did not like. He crossed the garage in 4 steps and crouched in front of Lily. "Hey, Bug," he said quietly. "Go back upstairs. I'll be up in a few minutes." Lily looked past him at Claire. "Is she here about the engine?" "Yes," Ray said. "Go on up." She studied Claire for another moment with those dark, steady eyes. Then she turned and went back up the stairs, her feet soft on the wood, biscuit trailing behind her. Ray stood. He turned back to Claire Sutton. He picked up the document from the bench. He looked at it, not reading it, just holding it for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he set it back down. "No," he said. Claire was quiet for a moment. Mr. Cole, the number, same voice, same volume. She looked at him. He could see her recalibrating, going through the options, finding the door she'd expected to use already closed. The legal process will be slow, she said, and expensive. For both of us. I know, Ray said. Your name on that patent doesn't automatically mean. I know what it means, Ray said. I wrote it. The garage was very quiet. Somewhere above them, faintly, the tide pool program played on. Claire Sutton looked at him for a long time. Then, she picked up the document from the bench, folded it, and put it back in her coat. She looked around the garage once more. The single bay, the Silverado, the coffee can of hardware, all of it. And Ray understood that she was seeing it the way she'd seen him the first time. Trying to reconcile what was in front of her with what she now knew was true. She left without another word. Ray stood in the garage after the sedan pulled away. He didn't move for a while. The cold air came in off the street, and the fluorescent light above the bench hummed at its usual frequency. He looked at the Silverado. He looked at the bench. He looked at the kitchen shelf through the interior doorway, where the manila envelope lived behind the cookbooks. The original schematic. The first drawing, his handwriting at 24. Before Gerald Harmon died. Before Diane got sick. Before any of it. He thought about what it had cost to carry that quietly. Not the patent. Not the money. The carrying itself. The years of customers who didn't know his name. The consultants who'd billed for work he could have done in an afternoon. The morning he'd walked out of that facility with his toolbox and driven 40 minutes home, and made lunch and not said a word. He was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He turned off the lower bay light. He went upstairs. Lily was back on the couch, asleep now, the tide pool program still going, biscuit tucked under her chin. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. One small foot had escaped the blanket. He crossed the room and covered it, without waking her. He sat in the chair across from her, for a while in the blue light of the television, not thinking about the engine, or Claire Sutton, or the patent. Just sitting, just being in the room where she was. Then he went back downstairs, finished the brake line, and locked up the garage. He had made his decision. He had made it the moment he set the document back on the bench. There was nothing left to decide. He turned off the light and went to bed. The arbitration hearing was held in Columbus on a Tuesday in February, in a building made almost entirely of glass. Ray wore the same gray jacket. He had considered wearing something else and then hadn't. Patricia Voss had offered to connect him with a colleague who did IP litigation. He had called her, listened carefully, and retained her. Her name was Audra Mensah. She was 43, had argued 11 patent cases in the last 6 years, and had won 9 of them. She had reviewed Ray's original employment contract with Harmon Dynamics, the patent assignment language, the acquisition terms when Harmon Meridian was formed, and the original hand-drawn schematic from behind the cookbooks, which Ray had driven to Columbus personally and delivered to her office in the manila envelope, still soft at the creases. She had called him after reviewing everything and said, simply, they should have read the contract more carefully. Lily had stayed with Ray's sister for the week. The morning he left, she had pressed biscuit into his hands at the door. For the trip, she said. I'll be back Thursday, he said. I know, she said. Biscuit still wants to go. He had driven to Columbus with the rabbit on the passenger seat. Handgallen Quilbras, the hearing room, was not a courtroom. It was a conference room on the 14th floor, with a long table, 3 arbitrators, and enough chairs for both legal teams and their principals. Claire Sutton arrived with 4 attorneys and her operations director. She sat across the table from Ray and did not look at him directly. Audra Mensah laid out the case in 40 minutes. The original patent, 7,814,203, had been filed by Ray Cole as a sole inventor in the final year of his employment at Harmon Dynamics. The employment contract contained an IP assignment clause, standard language, assigning work product, developed using company resources to the employer. What Harmon Dynamics' attorneys had not caught, and what Harmon Meridian's team had not caught during the acquisition, was a carve-out negotiated quietly by Ray's original employment attorney. A single subordinate clause, 11 words, specifying that foundational design patents filed in the final 90 days of employment required co-signature from the inventor to transfer. Gerald Harmon had agreed to it and initialed it himself. Ray had been 29 years old. He had not fully understood at the time what he was asking for. He had asked for it because Gerald Harmon had told him, once, that a man should always keep something that is his. Ray sat at the table with his hands folded and said nothing. The arbitrators reviewed the carve-out language. They reviewed the original filing date. They reviewed the acquisition transfer documents, which had been prepared by Harmon Meridian's legal team without the co-signature. They asked 3 questions. Audra answered 2 of them. Ray answered 1, a direct question about the schematic, whether the hand-drawn original matched the filed patent drawings. He said yes. He described, in 2 sentences, the specific structural element that the prototype had been attempting to replicate. The lead arbitrator wrote something down. The deliberation took less time than Ray had expected. When the panel returned, the lead arbitrator read the finding in the flat procedural language of someone who does this regularly. The IP assignment was invalid without co-signature. Patent 7,814,203 remained with the sole inventor. Harmon Meridian's use of the foundational design in their prototype engine constituted unlicensed implementation. The question of licensing terms and damages would proceed to a separate valuation hearing. Then she read the preliminary damages figure. The number was $4.3 million. Preliminary, subject to the valuation hearing. But the room understood that the valuation hearing would go in one direction. Ray looked at the number on the document in front of him. He sat with it for a moment, not calculating, not planning, just sitting with it the way you sit with something you have waited a long time to hear said, out loud by someone else. Audra put her hand briefly on the table near his, not touching, just near, and then withdrew it. Across the table, Claire Sutton's lead attorney was speaking quietly into her ear. She was listening with her eyes on the table. Then she looked up, and for the first time since Ray had met her, she looked at him without the calibration, without the assessment. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you have run out of other ways to look at them. She stood. She walked around the table. Her attorneys watched her. Ray watched her. She stopped in front of him and extended her hand. He stood and took it. She said, "I didn't ask your name." He said, "No." She held the handshake for a moment. Then she released it. She didn't say anything else. There was nothing else that would have fit. She turned and walked back to her team. Ray sat back down. Audra was already making notes for the valuation hearing. Patricia, who had attended as a witness and was sitting along the wall, was looking at her hands. The lead arbitrator was gathering her documents. In the document on the table in front of Ray, the formal finding, his name printed on the first line in the institutional font of legal proceedings, was the name that had been on the patent for 20 years, that had been on the schematic in the manila envelope, that had been on 4 prototypes that now lived in museums. Ray Cole, not a consultant, not a mechanic, not the man in the gray jacket, the name. He folded the document carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, next to the shorthand notes he always carried. He picked up Biscuit from the chair beside him. He texted his sister, "On my way Thursday. Tell her I fixed it." His sister replied in 4 seconds. She already knew. He was home by Wednesday. He had called ahead, and his sister had brought Lily back to the apartment above the garage before dinner, which meant Lily was at the kitchen table with her crayons when Ray came up the stairs, red to violet, precise as always, Gerald wobbling slightly beneath her elbows. She looked up when he came in. She didn't ask about the hearing. She didn't ask about the number or the patent or Claire Sutton or any of it. She held up a drawing instead, a crayon rendering of a man and a small girl standing next to something that was either a car or a very large loaf of bread, both of them with yellow circles for heads and straight lines for arms. "That's us," she said, pointing to the two figures. "And that's the engine." Ray looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It's a good engine," he said. "I know," she said. "I made it very big." He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. He washed his hands at the sink. He opened the refrigerator and started on dinner, the way he always started on dinner, methodically, without ceremony, taking stock of what was there and building from it. Eggs, half a block of cheese, an onion that was still good. He found a pan. Lily arranged her crayons while he cooked. The radiator knocked. The light above the stove buzzed at its usual frequency. After dinner, while Lily was brushing her teeth, Ray crossed to the kitchen shelf. He moved the cookbooks aside and took down the manila envelope. He didn't open it. He held it for a moment, the soft creases, the slight give of the paper inside, and then he put it back. Not hidden exactly, just where it lived. Some things you don't display, you just know they're there. He tucked Lily in. Biscuit went against the wall on her left side, the way Biscuit always went. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the low light. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." She considered something with her eyes on the ceiling, the way she considered things that were still forming. Then she looked at him. "The engine always had your name on it," she said. "It just forgot for a little while." Ray looked at her. She was already pulling the blanket up, already settling, already half somewhere else, the way children go quickly at the end of a day. She wasn't waiting for a response. She had said the thing, and it was said. He sat with it for a moment. Then he stood, turned off the lamp, and pulled the door most of the way closed behind him. He stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark. The garage was quiet below him. The street outside was quiet. The city Raymond Cole had spent 20 years building quietly inside himself. The patents, the schematics, the engine that bore his name before anyone remembered to look, had finally been given back to him. Not with noise, not with ceremony, just with a document, a handshake,